Are we doing an intro or anything like that?
Uh, This is the Disgruntled Crab and Rusty Culture most professional review show! So here we are, it's the end of January, and we're going for our third in the Batman the Animated Series retrospective. With this week's or month's show, we watched the third episode titled Nothing to Fear. And I'll let you start us off with your opinions on this one.
This is probably my favorite one so far of all the ones we've watched. And just a few points that then we can touch on later, but I just want to bring them up so they're in our mind. One thing I want to talk about is the music in this one. And the music has been really prevalent in all these episodes so far, but in this one particularly, I just think it's so well done. I think the detectiveness of Batman in this one is better than any we've watched so far. And yeah, just overall, really, really like this one.
I was going to touch on the music as well because it starts off right away. And I believe that is the Scarecrow's actual theme going through the show. I could be wrong. But just that haunting string that they have, basically a string solo going on whenever his fear toxin is taking over. It is a really good choice to carry this through so that it's a way to tell the audience what is going on without having to put huge signposts on the screen saying, this is the fear toxin in effect. I enjoyed this one as well, and I was hoping you would enjoy it. Basically because this one has probably the most iconic line that Kevin Conroy did as Batman. It's one of the ones that is used. People ask him to say the line. It's really iconic for that. And I was hoping the rest of the episode would carry that and it wasn't just that one little short clip.
And that is something I did want to bring up too, is like, this is the most badass Batman line out there, really. This is the one that everyone quotes.
Yes, we'll leave that hanging for the moment because later on we'll bring it up and we'll have Kevin Conroy do it. I'm not going to even try it because I can't do him justice.
Right, don't want to butcher it.
But going through the episode, I think the interesting thing about it in this one, Scarecrow is almost cliched. Because he even has his monologue about his origin and everything like that. But I think the focus is more actually on the Batman psychology that's brought out from the Scarecrow's fear toxin, which is an interesting take.
Yeah, I think we've gotten used to the fear toxin, at least in popular culture, as it just makes you see monsters. And sure, this does that to some extent, but even especially with Batman, it brings up that fear that he won't be enough in the eyes of his father. And that's something we don't really see played with when it comes to Scarecrow that much in popular culture Scarecrow.
I was curious as rewatching this, how much Christopher Nolan took that as inspiration for some of the Batman Begins scenes. Because a lot of it was beat for beat Batman Begins, which this came out long before that, because you have Scarecrow doing a heist somewhere, his henchman getting beat up, Batman getting hit with a toxin, a fire breaking out, and the Scarecrow leaving. I was kind of amazed by all the parallels that were in that compared to Batman Begins. And it's just a different take on that, where it's not Batman is fearing the bats. He is fearing that he is a disappointment to his father, which for someone like Batman that's kind of a universal worry for almost everybody, is how they stack up and how they would be viewed by those that they put the most respect or love into.
It's a really humanizing moment for Batman. I think you're absolutely right. Where this person who we see as the paragon of justice, the incorruptible, and in this moment he is afraid, just like the rest of us. That's something that's really cool. And sure, maybe our fears would be, like mine is bugs. I hate bugs, so I would see a lot of bugs. But Batman is this such a monolith, such a he's developed as a person so much that this is his fear. His truest fear is that he won't be good enough. And I think that really that tells a lot about his character, and it explains a lot of why he does what he does. Because I get it, like this is a cartoon about a superhero, but if you want to think about it in a realistic sense, in a real world thing, is he goes out every night and risks his life as just a man in a world full of crazy people and people with powers, and he goes out and he helps people for no gain of his own except to help people and to, as we find out later, seek some sort of vengeance.
One of the amazing things that was in the episode is the really character building moment between Batman and Alfred, because Batman admits this huge vulnerability to Alfred and lays it all in line, basically asks Alfred, it's like, would my father be proud of me? And Alfred, without hesitation, says that, of course. And I know this because I'm proud of you. And it was just an amazing moment in a cartoon, which is what I really like about this cartoon, is there's a lot of adult themes that are in there. It was actually a children's cartoon, which there's a few spots we'll get into in the later half of this review.
And that moment was great because it's something that I think we forget a lot, and it's that Alfred was the father figure to Batman for the majority of his life. And that it's just such a great moment between the two of them. It really is.
And it built on a lot of the characters. We get to see more of Bullock's basically disdain for Batman. He's like, Bullock looks at it that we're the police. We don't need this Zorro character, as he puts it in this episode, helping them out. We can handle this.
And just a side note before it gets forgotten, I just wanted to mention that one of my favorite parts of this episode are some of the side characters. Bullock being one of them in this episode, but also the henchmen in this episode are all stars. They are hilarious. They have so many funny moments that I don't know if you can play a few of them, but they have such good lines throughout this entire thing while they're working with Scarecrow. And there was one I was going to bring up and I just can't remember it now, unfortunately, but I want to make sure that they get their credit where credit is due.
Yes, this is probably one of the most expanded of the henchmen, because they have to carry a lot of Scarecrow's lines because Scarecrow doesn't have anybody else to play off of in this episode. So there were some pretty good lines. Batman ignores some of the henchmen for some reason, basically for, it seems like, the Scarecrow to get away at one point. That's one area where I'm like, but I'll let it go. So for the most part, the Batman stuff is really good. The Scarecrow stuff it's a little cliched and not as fleshed out, but it's held up by the great character moments and the great character building that Batman has to go through in this episode. And one of the great things is the scene we touched on before, which really shows the force of will that Batman has, is he's able to overcome the Scarecrow toxin on his own just by overcoming his particular fear.
Bruce. No, not now.
You are a disgrace.
No, you are not my father. I am not a disgrace. I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman!
Now this is something interesting, but I've always wondered, how does the Scarecrow gas work? Does it make you hallucinate things that you're afraid of? Or does it make you afraid? Because if it makes you, and this is probably looking way too deep into it, I know, but if it makes you afraid, then in theory you should not be able to overcome that if it's just triggering fear. But if it's making you hallucinate things you are afraid of, like it seems to be doing here, then that is something you can overcome, which is infinitely more interesting. So that's the one that my headcanon is going to go with.
I think in the cartoon they play it both ways. So it's one of those things where they have their cake and eat it too, but it's built up for the rule of cool. It's built up for character moments. So we can kind of let it slide, because all the other ones, it is built on, for the most part, because I think in Batman Begins, it's purely a chemical. And if you don't get the antidote, there's no way to overcome it. And I think later on in the cartoon, it's played the same way. But people are in the show, even at that point, they can overcome the fears that they're experiencing to do a particular task.
So are we doing spoilers?
Oh, yes.
Why don't we dive into because I agree that the Scarecrow plot, some of it is kind of cliche. I was thinking we could talk about what makes that the case. So from what I can tell of what Scarecrow's plot was he was a professor at this university, and he was doing experiments that the university did not approve of, so they fired him. So then he decided he was going to get revenge on the company who fired him, which is like the oldest story in the book.
They called me mad. I'm pretty sure that's an exact line that's in the show. That's one of the most cliched lines that could possibly be in it.
So I agree that whole thing is it's something we've seen before and is incredibly predictable. But I also agree that all this other stuff in it kind of props that up. These great character moments, you mentioned that. I agree with that. A lot of the dialogue in this between other characters other than Scarecrow is pretty darn good. So I think it's something that can be forgiven for sure.
And Scarecrow does have some moments where he's not just the cliched, especially when he's dealing with people other than his henchmen. It's basically when he's talking about his past and monologuing to his henchmen, where the cliches are littered everywhere. It's like it's just oozing from the screen as you're watching it. But everywhere else, he's solid.
Something I did like about this a lot, and I mentioned earlier, was the detective work of Batman in this one. And it is condensed to about a 30-second period, but it's a 20-minute show. And something we don't see a lot of Batman is the detectiveness of him, and when he's supposed to be the world's greatest detective. And we get to see a little scene here where he's using the Bat computer, and granted, he's basically just asking Siri, but you still get to see the workings of his mind, where he cross-references the records or personnel from the university with personnel from various chemical companies, and that's what leads him to figuring out who Scarecrow is. And I thought that was really well done. It was short, but I really appreciate when stuff like that is included, where Batman gets to do some detective work that isn't just magic.
Yes, or he just runs around beating up people.
Right.
So he's actually a detective in this one, which is why people like Commissioner Gordon would work with him, because he's actually helping them, not just running around beating up the bad guys, but actually figuring things out and helping them stop some of the crimes that's going on.
You're right. He can solve the cases that nobody else can, and it's not done with bullet magic like it is in The Dark Knight.
And before we go to the end, because this episode is actually fairly short in the amount of plot that's going on. There's 2 heists with the Scarecrow. One, Batman gets drugged, then he has to stop another one, which leads into the finale. So there's not actually a lot of varying plot that's happening. It's more about the character of Batman and how he's dealing with this actual weight of how he feels about his legacy and how he would compare to his father. So before we got to the end, because it has a pretty solid ending, in my opinion, I think we have to have a discussion on Zeppelins and blimps. Because somehow Scarecrow gets a Zeppelin. And it's obviously a Zeppelin because they crash into stuff. And it doesn't instantly deflate.
All right.
But I have a problem with this Zeppelin that's there.
Okay.
Because at one point, there's a henchman shooting through the Zeppelin, which means it's not filled with hydrogen. Until later on, when it crashes into a building and explodes like it's filled with hydrogen.
Well, they had hydrogen reserves in there. when the
Okay.
air when the air was being let out from the bullet holes, it was being replaced with hydrogen, obviously.
It's a nitpick. It's just one of those things. And basically, I wanted an excuse to be able to include a scene from Archer discussing Zeppelins and blimps. So I have ulterior motives.
God, who'd want to put a bomb on that?
Well, that's what we're hoping ISIS can find out.
No, why bother? Some broad gets on there with a staticky sweater and boom, it's...
Oh, the humanity!
No, that's...
Sterling, were you watching some other blimp commercial just now?
Technically, it's a rigid airship.
You had an agenda here.
I did, but it did bother me that it did fall into the cartoonish area of we're going to have it explode. Why? Why not?
Because it's awesome, man.
Oh, it also that led to there's the actual kiddie stuff that was in the episode. When you have the two henchmen fall, you have one that falls at least 40 stories into a canopy and survives, and another one that falls that I can't remember if Batman knocks him out of the Zeppelin or he happens to just fall out of the Zeppelin, but he ends up landing in a tree that's up on the rooftop of a building, and he's fine too. So that's one of those.
Yeah, but somehow you got to make it safe for kids, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I agree. That stuff is silly whenever you see it.
I think as the series later on, because this was the earlier episodes, they were kind of playing and had to play nice with the censors because, again, they saw this as a cartoon for kids where you can have stuff for kids, but it can also be serious, which is what the show is for the most part.
Right. And if you don't believe that, like almost all of Pixar, or old Pixar at least, is a great example of that. What was I going to say? Oh, I know why they didn't have those people splatter across the ground, and it's because that'd be just more work to animate. You know how much work it would be to make blood and guts and everything splashing all over the place as they hit the ground like a bug?
I do know how much that would be. That's if you've watched the new Edge Runner show on Netflix, there's a whole bunch of that in that cartoon. So,
Are we sponsored by Edge Runner?
No, unfortunately not.
Dang it. I thought that was a cheeky plug going in there.
I just found it because it looked like when Batman was swinging, it looked like he reached out an arm for that guy and he just fell. I think probably they realized part of the animation is like Batman wouldn't kill. So we need to figure out a way that he wouldn't even do like in Batman Begins where he's...
I won't kill you, but
I won't save you either.
Save you.
It's like,
kind of sounds like killing to me.
Yeah. Guy's hanging from a cliff. I'm not going to kill you. Yeah, but you can pull me up. I'm not going to kill you. I'm just going to step on your fingers really hard.
You're about to run me over with your car. I'm not going to hit you. I'm just going to keep going along my path of travel. And if you're in the way, so be it.
I tried to do it in that sort of technical way. I perceive it as not him killing directly, but by sort of, if the bad guys are associated with the thing that happens to blow up, that's not really. He would say that that's not really my problem, like they shouldn't have been around that
sort of
machine
manslaughter.
gun. What's that?
It's like manslaughter.
Yeah, a little more like manslaughter than actual murder.
Yeah.
So the ending, which I thought was really solid, is Batman goes to Crane Chemicals. And the way I see it, I could be wrong, but Scarecrow walks in and he hears the hiss of gas escaping. And two of his canisters of his fear gas are open and leaking out into the air. My assumption is that Batman arrived first.
Agreed.
And released the gas so that Scarecrow would get a taste of his own medicine.
That is the same impression I had, yep.
So Scarecrow is affected by his own gas and starts freaking out and starts seeing bat monsters attack him. as Batman approaches to capture him.
Which, talking about adult themes in a children's show, that's pretty freaking dark. If you're really thinking about that, he's poisoning him with his own poison and using it to drive him crazy. That's some heavy stuff in a so-called kids show, and I agree. I thought it was awesome.
I liked it too. I am kind of surprised they didn't get in trouble with Disney, because they cut to Batman flashing, and I believe that it looks really close to one of the cartoons from Fantasia.
Oh.
So I'll do a side-by-side comparison. I could be completely wrong. This might get cut, or it might not, and just prove that I'm such a dork, and I'm
That'd be funnier.
Making ridiculous claims. We'll see which way this goes. But then the best part about it is Bullock is trying to convince Commissioner Gordon that Batman and Scarecrow are in cahoots. He let the Scarecrow escape, and he'd bet his badge on that. And Commissioner Gordon, so you bet your badge on that, huh? He points up to the ceiling fan where the Scarecrow is swinging, hung up by the nape of his mask with the Batman symbol taped to his chest. And I believe that. Oh, sorry. We do not fade to the credits yet. We cut to Batman laying flowers on his parents' grave.
Which, again, heavy stuff.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff that in this show that is really delving into the psychology of Batman and how he's really tortured, but from his past. And many have made joking claims that he is a child that's trying to live with this trauma, but part of that is true from a character standpoint. He is coping with an extremely traumatic event that scarred him for life, but he turned that into something where he can provide good for his city.
The way I've always seen it is he feels like those were lives he couldn't save, and he's not going to let that happen again.
And that's why I've always felt that his number one rule of not killing was so important, because of the trauma that happened to him. So he doesn't want to be the one to take lives and cause somebody else to suffer the trauma that he did. So it's almost antithetical to his character when certain directors and writers get nonchalant with him killing people, because it's such an integral part of his character is that he is not the one to kill, right, because of the damage that it did to him.
I also like that the idea of him not killing, as that is the line, because a question that is often asked of Batman by other characters is, how are you so different than me? You know, how are you so different than the criminals? You're going out and you're committing crime, and that's why he's different. That's the line right there. He has a line he won't cross. The Joker does not have a line. And that's always, to me, what's made that relationship so interesting. And the most compelling stories with Batman and his villains, especially with the Joker, is when the Joker is trying to push Batman over that line.
Yes, and that's where a lot of the greatest stories can come from, is the differing ideologies. And I think that's where a lot of good shows and good movies, when they delve into that, because you can have two heroes that are approaching things from opposite perspectives, and there's a huge amount of tension that can be entered into that because of just the differing ideologies that they're working with and their different choices they make to solve the problem. I'm thinking of the second season of Daredevil. There's a great scene where the Punisher and Daredevil are having a huge debate on who is right in how they take care of things. Because Daredevil is convinced that he should not be killing people, because people have the right to not be injured, not be hurt, to actually, because there's always a spark of something still in there. And the Punisher is, when I stop somebody, they're stopped, we don't ever have to worry about them hurting somebody else again.
And what makes that so compelling is they're both right. You know, I tend to agree with Daredevil that everyone has a spark of goodness in there somewhere. But I also agree with Punisher that he's right. Some people are gonna ignore that spark their entire life. It doesn't matter what happens. They are gonna do what they're gonna do, and the only way to stop them is to stop them. And it's so compelling, and that's lost so much in Batman. And this show so far has done a great job of capturing that at most turns. That is his line. That's what makes him different.
And we got all of that out of a Saturday morning television show from the 90s. We're waxing poetic about a cartoon. Many would find that to be very, very too serious. But that's why you join us for these odd conversations that we have about pop culture. I wish more pop culture was like this now, where it was offering ideas for people to actually weigh on.
Well, soon AI will be making all the content, so
it'll make absolutely no sense. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning into this, and I have to put in a little plug here at the end because I am the host of another show. It's actually a podcast called Full of Shit, and you can find it on Spotify. Just type in Full of Shit, the 3 words, and it's basically just a wacky show where we just discuss just about anything. And that typically comes out on Fridays.
And also you can find the link in the description of this video. You can join us again. We'll be releasing one every week. So if you enjoyed this, come back, recommend it to somebody, check out Full of Shit on Spotify, and we'll catch you next time.
One of the things we say on Full of Shit all the time is if you really want to help the show, take one of your friends' phones and then subscribe to this channel forcibly without them knowing. And then maybe one day they will stumble across it and they'll watch it, and you've planted the seeds. You've indoctrinated another fan.
Perfect.